China's President Xi Jinping is on what's been called a charm offensive across Southeast Asia, visiting Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. It comes as companies in China say they could be badly hit by the ongoing trade war with the U.S.
Breaking overnight, tariffs on China could jump as high as 245%. A White House fact sheet on Wednesday says the new hike is in response to China's retaliatory tariff of 125%. President Trump also hinting that phones and electronics may not be exempt from tariffs after all. Small imports will also be tariffed starting May 2nd. The president closing a loophole that had allowed imports less than $800 to be tariff exempt.
Oren, when we last had you on, we were going through your plan for a bit of, perhaps restructuring is, I guess, the best word of the Trump's economic deal, which I've been calling the Great Deal vis-a-vis tariffs. And it looks as though they may have somewhat taken some of your advice. Tell me how you see the plan as it stands now.
Well, I think they've made some really good course corrections. And thanks for having me back. It's great to see you again. Things are moving so quickly right now. I think the most important thing that they did was to postpone a lot of the tariffs. You know, they had this category that they were calling the reciprocal tariffs that were targeted at most countries, a lot of our allies, and intended, very importantly, to get those allies to change their practices, to have trade practices that are a lot friendlier to the United States. But slapping all those tariffs on from day one was unsurprisingly causing a lot of disruption. It was causing a lot of costs that I don't think we really needed if the goal was to have new negotiations. And so what they've done is to put those on hold, say, we want to try to have the negotiations first. And if the negotiations don't get anywhere, then the tariffs are still looming in the background. And so I think that's the right way to treat our allies. We're already seeing progress in some of the negotiations. And then it separates out China because they didn't take it off China. To the contrary, the tariffs with China have been going up even more. And, you know, I think we have to find a way to do that a little bit more gradually as well. But it's very good that we're separating China out and saying we have allies that we want to fix this with and have free trade with. And then we have China, who is not playing by the rules, is not going to play by the rules, is not a good partner for the United States. And they need to be on the outside looking in.
And this has been a huge issue. Now, we've also seen, by the way, China, I've been tracking the ASEAN meeting. China, of course, going down, meeting with ASEAN, of course, Malaysia, who they've had a ton of deals with in the past, but also Vietnam. And Vietnam is a huge piece of this because a lot of the manufacturing that was moved out of China, they called it nearshoring, but it wasn't really because they just moved it south to Vietnam, who's been certainly a longtime antagonist for China. But having Xi Jinping go down there and really point out and sign a lot of new trade deals with the Vietnamese, I think shows that China is making big moves. And this is the first time, by the way, that Xi Jinping has gone to ASEAN. Typically, China sends a lower level delegation, but the fact that he was there himself shows to me that China actually is taking this very seriously because they want to pretend as if they don't have as much exposure to the export markets as they want us to think, and they say, oh, we have this burgeoning Chinese middle class, we'll be able to sell things domestically and internally. And I just don't quite think that's the case, is it?
Well, certainly not at this point. And the funny thing, that's what the United States has been pushing them toward. It's been saying if you want to be a good participant in a global economy, you can't just be producing enormous amounts of stuff that you dump onto the market, into other markets. You need to have your consumers buying more of Chinese-made stuff, and then you need to have your consumers buying more stuff from around the world. And so far, China has just shown no willingness to do that. In fact, right now, some folks are saying the world is going through kind of a China shock 2.0, a whole nother unprecedented wave of additional manufacturing that is kind of flooding global markets. And so, I think the reality is that at the end of the day, this isn't going to be everybody sides with the US and China is isolated and alone. China is a powerful country. It has its own interests. It has allies. It has countries like, Vietnam that are very much dependent on it in various ways. And that may be part of what happens in the long run. What the United States can't tolerate any longer is what we've had going on where, we say, well, we need to keep China at a distance, but Mexico is our trading partner and Mexico welcomes China in. And so now all the Chinese stuff just comes to us, let's say, through Mexico. And so what I think the Trump administration is really focused on is saying we want to have strong alliances. We want to have free trade with our partners. But they all need to hold hands with us, both on having fair and balanced trade amongst ourselves, and on all agreeing that China and China's way of doing business is not welcome.
Look, it's actually something that I find it so funny because, Gavin Newsom is out there and he's suing the Trump administration now regarding tariffs on behalf of California. And it's like, not that long ago, it was the Democrats and it was the left that were opposing China. They were the ones, go back to 1999, that were loudly and in some cases violently. In the case of, you had these far leftists, the Antifa, the whole Battle of Seattle. What was that about? It was about denying China access to the this ascension to the WTO. And it ultimately corrupted the World Trade Organization. I don't usually agree with the far left, but they were right about this. They were absolutely right that allowing China into the WTO would completely corrupt the global economic system. It did, and it hurt American workers. And now you turn things around, and suddenly it's like it's the sort of former Democrats turned Republicans like Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, like many others that are now coming around and saying, well, not that Elon's a super tariff guy. I don't mean to say that, but I just mean to say that you're seeing a lot of Democrats become Republicans, but they're bringing this idea, Peter Navarro, former Democrat, by the way, bringing this idea, California Democrat, bringing this idea of protectionism back online. And that's really what it's about. And I wanted to also mention, you have a whole new book out that's coming out, The Once and Future Worker. And that's exactly what you're talking about here. It's this idea of actually working on having government work on behalf of American workers.
Yeah, the switch that you're describing in the political parties is something we're seeing going on in so many ways, that as the Democratic Party becomes much more aligned with the highest income, college educated workforce in big cities, and you're seeing the working class move much more into the Republican Party, and that's playing out in all sorts of ways, right? You're seeing labor unions starting to align a little bit more with the Republican Party, and Republicans reach out to labor unions. You're seeing on these trade issues, in all sorts of ways, the Democratic Party, especially because they just cannot bring themselves to agree with Trump ever about anything, find themselves, if Trump does something that's good for workers, well, then the Democrats are going to be against it. And, I had Congressman Jared Golden, he's a Democrat from rural Maine. He was on the American Compass podcast, talking with me last week because he's a big supporter of these tariffs. And he sees it's not about which party or, which president is promoting them. He thinks they can really help workers in his district. And he's getting attacked that all these other Democrats, who he says, wait, I thought this is what we were for, but there are too many Democrats out there that are now just for being against Donald Trump. And if Trump is going to do things that is good for workers, it's going to push Democrats into a worse position in a lot of ways.
That's a great example. The industrial Northeast. I've got family up there, by the way, Sanford, Maine, and that whole area, and that it's very post-industrial down to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the Navy yards are, and that whole area of New England, which used to be this huge textile hub. It was a ship making hub, of course. This is something, by the way, that J.D. Vance has talked about again and again, our shipbuilding capacity. That's what New England was famous for, by the way. Even in colonial times, it was known for shipbuilding. That's why, by the way, that New England has that shipbuilding base up there, because that's exactly what they did. That's literally why it's called New England. And so much of the manufacturing and trade that went through there has completely been gutted by these practices. And I think it's something where I've spent a lot of time in Maine, and like I said, I have family there. It's one of those places where once you get off of the sort of the coastal Kennebunkport areas, you realize that a lot of the state is economically depressed because of these very same forces.
Yeah, shipbuilding's a great example, right? Because as you said, the United States used to be a leader in shipbuilding. Now we make essentially no ships. Ships are all made in China, in Korea. And you ask, like, well, why is that, right? Economists said, well, we're going to do free trade. Other countries will specialize the stuff they're best in. We'll specialize in the stuff we're best in. Why don't we make ships anymore? It's not because there's anything special about Korea or China that makes it a better place to make ships. It's because those governments, their policy said this stuff matters. We're going to actually support it and make sure we're good at it. And we had too many leaders in the United States who just shrugged and said, we don't care. It doesn't matter what we make here. It doesn't matter if we make anything here. And sure enough, now there's a lot of stuff we just don't make anymore. And I think, underlying so much of President Trump's push is a recognition that making things matters. And if making things matters, then free trade can be great, but free trade can only be great if you get to make stuff and buy stuff. And this system where the rest of the world gets to make stuff and we just get to buy stuff, it hollows out our economy. It leaves us further in debt. And it's been a disaster for a lot of workers.